The old shop on Windmere Lane always smelled of oil, pine wood, and something faintly metallic, like time itself had a scent. Tucked between a cobbler's and a shuttered tailor's loft, Alden's clockworks rarely saw foot traffic except in December, when the children would press their noses against the fogged glass, watching the slow pirouette of dancing brass figures in the window display. It was winter now, a quiet, brittle winter that had crested the eaves in lace-thin icicles and muffled the whole street in soft, unjudging snow. Inside the shop, Alden crouched by his workbench, peering through his jeweler's loop at a minuscule gear no bigger than a snowflake. The ticking was constant, a background hymn of precision and persistence. Tiny cuckoos, grandfather clocks, and dancing ballerinas marked their hours without fail. Alden barely heard them anymore. His fingers, worn but deft, moved with instinct born from decades of crafting mechanisms that mimicked life, but never quite lived. But something did live here in the cold months. It began 6 winters ago. He had spilled a bit of tea on the sill and left it to cool near the frost-laced window pane. The next morning, a shimmer had danced through the air above it, a breath of movement, pale and quick. He thought he imagined it, until it left a frost flower on the wood that hadn't melted for days. Since then, they came with the cold. Little ice spirits, light as featherfall and silent as dusk. They were no taller than matchstick, translucent like frozen soap bubbles, and fragile beyond reason. Some flitted among the gears, curious. Others clung to the pendulums, swaying with time's beat. They never stayed past the thaw. Alden never spoke of them. Not to his cousin in Hartford, not to the boy who delivered firewood. They were his, private, sacred, like grief or prayer. This year, they had arrived late, storm winds delaying their arrival until mid-January. But come they did, gliding in on a gust that snuck through the chimney flue. Alden smiled as he always did, his lips not quite remembering the shape of joy anymore. But this winter, one of them lingered. She was different, taller, clearer. Her edges shimmered with subtle color, like au bord de mumet. And she stayed, long after the others had vanished into puddles and vapor with the spring sun. She sat now on the windowsill, staring out through the wavering glass, as if watching something only she could see. Alden turned to look at her. "You'll melt soon, little one," he said softly. She did not turn, but she did not melt. Alden adjusted his spectacles and walked to the window, the floorboards sighing beneath his step. Outside, the snow had begun to retreat from the corners of the cobblestone, revealing patches of muddy gray beneath. The frost was thinning. The gutters dripped steadily. Yet she remained, seated with legs crossed, one arm resting on her lap, the other stretched toward the glass as though she could hold the sky in her palm. She was no illusion. Alden had tested that, gently placing a sliver of copper wire beside her one night, only to find it etched with frost runes come morning. Her presence drew chill into the room, subtle but constant. His clocks had begun to tick a touch slower near the window, their brass reluctant in the cold. "You ought to be gone," he whispered, rubbing his palms together. "You are out of season." Still she did not stir. By late March, he started leaving sugar crystals and thin slivers of ice beside her. She accepted them, not greedily, but with grace, as though honoring a ritual he hadn't meant to start. Sometimes she touched the melted water. Sometimes she didn't. He began to speak to her, not expecting response, only needing the silence to be less empty. "I built a clock for a girl once," he said one morning, polishing a rosewood case. She was 11, asked for a timepiece with no hands, said she didn't want to count the minutes left with her mother. He swallowed. "I gave her one that chimed instead. Every hour a song. I think she liked that." The frost spirit tilted her head just slightly. It was the first time she had moved in weeks. That night, Alden dreamed of her standing in a glade of silver trees, their leaves tinkling like wind chimes. She held a lantern made of frost, its light as soft as sorrow. He woke with the idea burning behind his eyes. A clockwork garden. Not a machine to measure time, but to hold it. A place where no chime would chase away the moment. A sanctuary, a stillness. She could stay, perhaps. Not forever. Nothing was forever, but for longer than the thaw. And so he began. He closed the shock to walk-ins, drawing heavy curtains over the front windows and posting a crooked sign. Repairs only, vaccination. The neighborhood children were disappointed, but they had new chalk and warmer weather now. They'd return in December, noses smudged against the glass again. Back at his workbench, Alden sketched feverishly, gears interlocking like vines, petals made of silvery brass, crystalline leaves that would sway not with wind, but with the ghostly breath of memory. He dismantled old pieces, plundered the birdsong chimes from a forgotten cuckoo, harvested sapphire bearings from a broken moon phase dial. Every part had to sing, not tick, sing. And as the days warmed and the birds returned, the spirit remained, watching, quiet, unmelting, waiting. By mid-April, the snow was gone. Crocuses bloomed in cracks between stones outside the shop, and children skipped rope under trees just beginning to bud. Inside, the cold clung to Alden's workshop like breath on a mirror. The frost spinet was the anchor of winter now. She had not spoken, not in words, but something passed between them in silence. A recognition, a shared devotion to delicate, vanishing things. Alden hadn't slept much. His beard had grown wild, and his fingers were stained with ink and brass polish. He moved like a man possessed, not by madness, but by meaning. Each day he added to the garden, the tulip whose petals opened on the hour with a soft mechanical sigh. A willow tree, with branches made from tiny ribbon springs that trembled ever so slightly when someone exhaled nearby. A pool, no larger than a teacup, lined with mercury glass and filled with melted ice from the spirit's morning offerings. Its surface rippled even when untouched. The centerpiece was hardest, a single frozen rose, its petals sculpted from ground quartz and mounted on a shaft of watchmaker's steel. Around it, a ring of gears turned not with force, but by the residual breath of the frost spirit herself. She powered it, though Alden had never shown her how. He looked up one evening and saw her standing. Not sitting, not perched, standing. She was facing the garden, translucent feet planted on the workbench's edge, hands folded before her like a figure in prayer. Alden's heart jolted. "You seal it," he whispered. "Don't you? It's yours." A shimmer passed over her skin, like moonlight through mist. She stepped forward. The chill followed her, gentle but precise. As she moved, the pool lit with faint light. The tulip opened, even though it was well past the hour. The quartz rose turned slowly, its gears whispering like remembered lullabies. Then she stepped into the garden. Alden held his breath. The clockwork vines stirred. The mercury pool brightened. The tiny wind tree let out a soft sigh, and the frost spirit knelt beneath it. And for the first time, clear, delicate, and ringing with a tone he would remember until the end of his days, she spoke. "You made room." It wasn't sound exactly, not air pushed through vocal cords. It was resonance. It came from within the gears, the glass, the quiet. Alden swallowed hard. "I didn't want to lose you." She tilted her head. "Then stop keeping time." He opened his mouth, but she raised one slender hand. "Make time, hold time, but don't count it." A tear rolled down Alden's cheek, unexpected and warm. For a moment, it caught the same shimmer that clung to her limbs. "I don't know how," he admitted. She turned her eyes to the garden, her home now, her refuge. "Then stay and learn." The next morning, Alden didn't wind a single clock. He brewed tea slowly, savoring the warmth against his palms, and sat near the window without polishing, sketching, or counting anything at all. The frost spirit rested beneath the clockwork willow, her form slightly more defined than before. Her edges no longer shimmered in constant motion. They pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. Time moved, but it didn't push. It wasn't easy. Decades of habit pulled at him like tight threads. The pendulums in the room still ticked, softer now, like respectful whispers in a chapel. But Alden resisted the urge to regulate them. Instead, he listened to the irregular symphony they created. each piece playing to its own rhythm, like birds waking in spring. Days passed. The spirit no longer just watched, she interacted. She brushed a finger over the tulip's petals, traced the contours of the gear pines, and she smiled. Not often, not brightly, but with the softness of frost melting on sunlight-warm stone. Alden began to understand. There was a difference between keeping time and honoring it. The former measured life in minutes, the latter in moments. One afternoon, he caught her standing beside the pool. A single droplet from her fingertip fell into the mirrored water. The pool responded, not with a splash, but a slow bloom of light that rippled out in delicate concentric rings. Alden approached. What was that? Her head tilted, and this time the words were clearer, still resonant, still not sound, but unmistakably hers. Memory. He stared into the water and saw a boy's face, not his own, but close. The boy held a toy watch, its hands drawn in crayon. A voice laughed in the background, a mother's voice. He blinked, and it was gone. The frost spirit's expression grew solemn. "You've forgotten too much," she said. He sat beside her, legs crossed like a child. "Help me remember." She touched the pool again. This time, it showed a shop, not yet worn by time. A younger Alden placed the clock into the hands of a girl, with wide eyes and a feather in her cap. She hugged him. He had forgotten her name, but not the hug, never the hug. And something inside him softened, cracked, let light in. "Can we keep these?" he asked. The spirit looked at him with something close to sorrow. "We can visit, but not live in them." Alden nodded slowly. The garden, his workshop, the silent understanding between them, it was enough. Each day, he added a new element. A sundial made of shadowed glass that turned only when someone forgave themselves. A swing set, with chain links made from the escapements of forgotten pocket watches. And a bench. Simple, wooden, splintered. A place to sit and simply be. The frost spirit sat there often. And one evening, as twilight painted the room in violet and silver, she turned to him and whispered, "I'm almost done." Alden froze. The words hung in the air like breath on winter glass, delicate, fading, final. "Done?" he echoed, the syllables catching on the edge of his throat. She didn't answer at first, just looked at the garden, her garden, the tiny world they had built together from silence and gear teeth and memory. Her form shimmered subtly, not with cold this time, but with something more fragile, that morning mist beginning to lift. He stood slowly, walked toward her, and knelt beside the bench. "You said if I made room." "I did," she replied, her voice softer now, harder to hear in the waking world. Alden looked down at his hands, calloused, lined, trembling slightly. I thought we could keep you." "You didn't keep me," she said. "You honored me." The mercury pool rippled again, though neither of them touched it. This time, it showed the clockwork garden itself, but older. Dust had settled into its edges. A thin vine of rust curled along one brass stem. The quartz rose had lost a petal. A future, a memory not yet lived. He looked away. "I'm not ready," Alden admitted. She touched his wrist. The cold was almost gone. "No one ever is," she said, "but I am." And he understood, in the way one understands winter will always end, even if it breaks the heart each time it does. She was not just a spirit of frost. She was the essence of endings, the breath between seasons, a pause, a hush before the next song. The garden had given her what she needed, and it had given Alden what he hadn't known he lacked: stillness, wonder, grief, healing. She stepped off the bench and into the center of the garden. Every gear turned as she moved, a chorus of soft mechanical music rising up around her. The willow's branches bowed. The quartz rose shed one more petal. The mercury pool stilled. Then, without fanfare, she closed her eyes and dissolved. Not shattered, not vanished, just changed. Her shimmer faded into the rose's core, into the roots of the brass vines, into the breath of the garden itself. She had become part of it. Not held, not counted, cherished. Alden stood for a long while, the ticking clock silent around him. And then, for the first time in weeks, he opened the curtains. The sun spilled in, warm, golden, gentle. Dust motes danced like spirits in the air. The shop filled with light and life again, and children outside squealed and a cart of sugared buns rolling by. He turned back to the workbench and saw the garden had not changed, and yet everything had. A tiny plaque now rested at its edge. He hadn't placed it there. But he read the words aloud, voice breaking on the last line. Some things aren't meant to be measured, only remembered. A week passed. Alden kept the shop open again. People returned unaware that anything had shifted. They came for mainspring repairs and heirloom overhauls. They asked about chiming patterns and antique hands. They smelled the familiar blend of pine oil, brass, and dust, and they smiled. But Alden had changed. He moved slower, not from age, but from intention. He spoke softer, listened longer. He smiled more, but never idly. And every night he wound only one clock, the smallest one in the back, hidden behind a wooden panel, ticking quietly beside the garden. He never told anyone about the frost spirit, except once. It was late April, and a girl, 7, maybe 8, stood in the middle of the shop with a broken music box in her hands. Its casing was chipped porcelain, painted with faded roses, and its key was missing. She stared at Alden with wide, serious eyes. "My mom said it used to sing to me," she said. "But it forgot how." Alden knelt, took the box in his palm, turned it over. "I think it remembers," he said. "It's just waiting for someone to listen." The girl blinked. "You think it's sad?" He looked past her, at the soft shimmer that still clung to the garden's glass leaves. Faint, nearly gone, but there. "No," he said. "I think it's holding on." He fixed the box, didn't charge her. After she left, he sat beside the garden, watching the quartz rose thin. Once, slowly, like a nod. That night, he dreamed again, but not of silver trees or frost lanterns. This time, he stood in a field of tall clocks, each one ticking at its own pace. Some fast, some slow, some barely moved at all. But among them all stood a figure made of light and wind and snow. She wore petals in her hair now. "Will you come again?" he asked. "Only if you forget me," she said gently. He smiled. "Then I'll wait for winter." She reached up, touched one of the clocks, and it stopped. Not broken, just paused. "For you," she said. "A gift." And when he awoke, Alden found one clock in the shelf had ceased ticking. It was the one above the garden. The time read 5:47, the same minute she had left. He never wound it again. The seasons turned, as they always did. Spring melted into summer, and the air thickened with jasmine and brass polish. Children came and went, older now, asking more questions. Alden taught one of them how to oil a pivot pin, another how to set a pendulum without leaning the case. He never rushed their curiosity. He let it bloom. And he kept the garden hidden. It sat behind its velvet curtain near the rear of the shop, nestled between the wall and an old display case full of forgotten tools. No one asked about it. No one noticed the soft coldness in the air that lingered near that corner, even in July. Until the boy came. He was maybe 12, thin, quick-eyed, carrying a small brass locket on a chain too long for his neck. His voice cracked when he asked if Alden could fix the timepiece inside it. "It belonged to my sister," he said. Alden held the locket in his hands. The mechanism inside had rusted, but not beyond hope. It was a simple movement, almost childlike in design. He began his usual process: ask a story, find the need, then do more than asked. But the boy hesitated. "She died last winter," the boy said quietly. "I don't want the time on it to move again. I want to keep it like it was, the last time she wore it." Alden's fingers went still. He looked up. "What time does it read?" 5:47. Alden felt the air shift. He stood slowly, and for the first time in many months, pulled back the velvet curtain. The boy stepped forward, curious, and there it was, the garden. Soft light poured from within. The tulips still had opened when the wind changed. The quartz rose turned just slightly as they watched. The willow branches swayed without breeze. The boy stared, breath caught in his throat. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "Is it magic?" Alden shook his head, gently. No, he said. It's memory. But that's close. They stood together, old and young, silent in the hum of the ticking world. Then Alden knelt, opened the back of the locket, and gently adjusted the inner spring. Not to tick, but to rest, to stay, to hold the moment, and nothing more. There, he said, returning it. Time isn't moving in this one, but it isn't frozen either. It's listening. The boy smiled, eyes wet but grateful. Will she know? Alden didn't answer directly. He looked toward the garden. She already does. That summer, Alden began to change the way he crafted. He no longer made clocks to keep time. Instead, he made pieces that marked moments. A watch that chimed only when its wearer smiled. A wall piece that shifted color with the changing of memories. A pocket timekeeper that ticked in rhythm with its owner's breath, speeding when they ran, slowing when they wept. People didn't always understand what they were buying. Some thought the mechanisms were broken. Some brought them back, complaining the hands didn't move right. But others returned in tears. A woman claimed her new mantel clock glowed soft blue every time she remembered her mother's laugh. A father said his wrist piece only ticked when he held his newborn. A widower came back to ask how his bedside chime knew the exact hour his wife used to sing. Alden never explained, not fully. He just smiled, handed them a cloth to polish the brass, and told them to listen. And in his workshop, behind the velvet curtain, the frost never fully left. Each winter, of course, it deepened. Thin eye rolls crawled along the edges of the garden's glass, and the air turned crisp near the mercury pool. But even in midsummer, if you stood still long enough, you could feel the chill of her memory brushing your skin. He saw her only once more. It was a bitter January morning. Snowflakes whirled past the windows like little dancers late to the stage. Alden had just finished oiling the escapement wheel of a commission when the light in the room shifted. He turned. She stood near the willow, hands folded, a wisp of silver in her hair. Her form was faint, almost immaculate, but her eyes were as vivid as ever. You're well, she said. I'm trying, Alden replied. The quartz rose opened fully for the first time, revealing a center of soft white light. Her gaze went to it, then back to him. You made a place where time listens, she said. He nodded, chest tight. Because you showed me how. She smiled. Then she stepped into the rose. A slow whirl of frost curled outward. A single crystalline note rang through the garden. A sound like the chime of all the clocks that had ever meant something, striking together in one perfect, vanishing moment. And she was gone. No dissolving, no shimmer. Just peace. Alden stood alone for a while. Then he sat, hands in his lap, beside the garden, the bench, the silent clock reading 5:47. And he whispered, more to himself than to the air, I will remember. Years passed. Alden grew slower. His hands, once precise and nimble, now trembled slightly when fitting springs and coils. He wore thicker glasses, spoke more softly, but he never stopped creating. His clocks became wearer, less mechanical, more emotional. They were no longer instruments, they were invitations. The world outside changed. Windmere Lane gained a coffee shop, lost the cobbler. Children he once taught to wind clocks came back as adults with children of their own. Some brought old pieces for repair. Some brought nothing but memories. They always left with something more. One rainy November morning, a young woman entered the shop, carrying an old, dusty case. She placed it on the counter without a word. Alden opened it, blinked. It was one of his earliest pieces, a pendulum clock carved from maple and inlaid with moonstone chips. It hadn't ticked in decades. It was my grandmother's, the woman said. She always said it only worked when someone in the house was in love. Alden chuckled, fingers brushing the moonstone. She wasn't wrong. He fixed it, gently, lovingly, whispering to it like an old friend as he realigned the anchor and reset the rhythm. When the tick finally returned, soft as a kiss on paper, he looked up. She must have been very loved. She was, the woman whispered. She said this place was magic. Alden's eyes softened. No, he replied. Not magic, just honest. Later that evening, after the lamps had dimmed and the street was empty. He sat beside the garden. The willow had gone still. The quartz rose had not turned in years, and the pool, though still glassy and clean, no longer shimmered. Still, the cold lingered, like a secret. Alden leaned forward and placed one hand gently over the bench's armrest. The wood was smooth now, worn, loved. He sighed. "My time's slowing," he said aloud. "I feel it." A breeze, impossibly soft, passed through the garden. No wind, no draft, just acknowledgement. He nodded. "I know. I've made peace with it." He stood with effort and walked to his workbench. From a hidden drawer, he retrieved a small velvet pouch. Inside was a single gear, opal-like in sheen, light as a feather, etched with impossibly fine runes. It had never been used. Not until now. He placed it at the base of the silent 5:47 clock, just beneath the dial. Not to start it again, but to complete it, to finish the story. Then he sat once more beside the garden, leaned back against the wall, and closed his eyes. And he waited, not for the end, but for her. And somewhere, deep in the stillness, time listened. The days in the shop grew quieter. People still came, but they lowered their voices now, like stepping into a chapel. They saw the change, the softening. Alden's hair, once steel gray, now white and wispy like the breath of winter itself. He moved like clockwork worn thin, deliberate in every motion. And the garden? It changed too. No new frost formed, no shimmer in the air, but nothing faded either. It remained intact, preserved, not by ice, but by memory. Visitors rarely saw it. Only a few were invited behind the curtain, and even fewer understood what they were witnessing. Then one morning, the curtains were drawn shut and the door left locked. A boy, now a man, who had once held a broken locket in that very shop, stood outside in the snow, hand on the glass, breath fogging the pane. He waited. Inside, Alden was still. He sat, as he had the night before, beside the garden. His hands rested on his lap, a slight smile on his face, peaceful, as though he had merely drifted off mid-thought. The clocks around him ticked on, but none struck the hour. All of them, every one, had stopped at 5:47. The garden glowed faintly. A soft blue hue settled over the willow. The quartz rose, long still, opened once more, its final petal unfolding like a secret long held. And then a figure emerged. She was no longer translucent, no longer ice. She was light and form and memory woven into something whole. Her eyes held the same opal shimmer, but her presence had changed. She knelt beside Alden, placed a hand over his. "You kept your promise," she whispered. And for the first time, he opened his eyes, not wide, but enough. He looked at her and smiled. "You came back. I never left." He exhaled, slow and full, then closed his eyes again. This time, they didn't open. The frost spirit sat with him a while longer. Then she stood, lifted her hand toward the rose, and the garden shifted. Slowly, gear by gear, leaf by leaf, it folded inward, not collapsing, but sealing, preserved, whole. A bell above the door chimed once, though no wind touched it. And when the boy, now a man, was finally let in by the landlord the next day, he found nothing behind the curtain but a bench, a sealed glass case, and a single brass plaque. Here, time listened. Here, time loved. And beside the clock, that no longer ticked, a key rested, tied with a velvet ribbon. The boy took it, and outside, the snow began to fall. Soft, silent, timeless. He didn't open the glass case for a long time. The key felt warm in his palm despite the winter air. He turned it over as he walked home, velvet ribbon fluttering in the breeze, unsure whether to hide it, wear it, or bury it beneath his pillow like a relic from a forgotten world. But something in him knew. This wasn't an inheritance, it was a trust. Days passed, the shop was officially closed, the sign turned backward. But rumors stirred. Whispers of a secret garden inside, of a frost that never melted, of a clockmaker who never wound clocks to count time, but to hold it gently, like a bird in cupped hands. People left letters at the doorstep. Some simply said thank you. Others carried stories of clocks that sang, of timepieces that soothed grief, of quiet words exchanged with Alden that changed the shape of a life. And the boy, his name was Julian, read them all. On the 7th day, at dusk, he returned. The shop smelled the same, a little more dust, a little more stillness, but the warmth lingered. The kind that didn't come from fire. He moved past the empty workbench, past the shelves where antique hands still pointed in silent directions, until he reached the velvet curtain. And the taste behind it. It was a glass dome now, crystal clear, funked faintly at the base, as though some ink cold and living it still breathed within. Inside, the garden was unchanged. The tulip sat forever in the edge of opening. The willow was mid-sway. The mercury pool shone like moonlight held still. And the rose was blooming. He slipped the key into a hidden groove at the base of the dome. It clicked. The glass dissolved, not shattered, not lifted. It simply vanished, like fog burned off by morning light. A pulse of cool air brushed his face. He stepped forward. There were no instructions, no journal, no whisper of what came next, just the garden and a small engraved timepiece lying on the bench. It wasn't ticking. Yet, Julian picked it up, turned it in his hand. On the back, etched in Alvin's familiar script, were 5 words. Not to count, only to carry. He understood, in some deep and silent way. Not all time is meant to be told. Some time is meant to be remembered. And so, he sat. The frost did not bite him. The garden did not change, but something inside him did. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the old brass locket that once held his sister's frozen moment at 5:47, and placed it gently beside the rose. The petals glowed faintly, and somewhere in that timeless hush, the garden accepted its next keeper. Julian didn't reopen the shock right away. He spent his days within, dusting shelves that hadn't been touched in months, organizing screws so small they could disappear with a breath, rethreading ancient chimes that hung like quiet ghosts from the ceiling beams. But the front door remained locked. A sign still read, "Closed, repairs only." He wasn't a clockmaker, not yet. He had once wanted to be a painter, or maybe a pianist. But now, with the key always tacked near his heart, and the garden behind the curtain pulsing like a heartbeat made of light, he understood what Alden had truly built. This was never just a shop. It was a sanctuary. For broken things. For beautiful endings. For time that did not move forward, but inward. One day, mid-autumn, a woman knocked softly on the door. She held nothing in her hands, just a nervous look and eyes rimmed red. Julian didn't open the door, but he listened. "My father used to bring me here," she said to the wood. "He told me clocks could heal memories. I never believed him." Silence. Wind. The sound of a dry leaf scraping the stoop. I think I believe him now." She didn't wait for an ever. She left a necklace, broken, and walked away. Julian picked it up and brought it to the bench. He didn't try to fix it. He simply placed it beside the tulip and watched as the bloom bent ever so slightly toward it. The leaf curled around the chain, not holding it, just sheltering it. The next morning, when Julian checked again, the necklace had been cleaned, wreath-bedded, restored, but not by his hand. After that, more came. An elderly man with a pocket watch stopped at 11:11 for 30 years. A child with a wristwatch had spun backward after her mother died. A couple with a broken anniversary clock that hadn't chimed since their last fight. Julian never advertised, never put out signs, never posted photos. But somehow, those who needed it found their way. Each time, he let the frost guide him. He would open the curtain only when he felt the shimmer return. The light that wasn't light, the cold that wasn't cruel. Sometimes it would come just as the person turned to leave, hand on the doorknob. Sometimes not until they whipped. Sometimes not at all. But when it came, the garden would stir, and time would open. Not to be repaired, not to be reversed, but to be held and remembered. Winter returned as if it never left. Soft at first, just a hush in the air, a pale breath clinging to the windows. Then fuller, rounder. Snow layered Windmere Lane in silence, draped the rooftops in white wool. And inside the shop, the cold came not from weather, but from within. The garden was waking. Julian felt it in the floorboards, heard it in the subtle change of pitch when the clocks ticked in unison, as though anticipating something. The mercury pool in the garden rippled again, unprovoked. The willow's branches lifted, barely, like a slow inhale after a long sleep. She was near. One evening, as he locked the front door, he noticed a girl standing at the edge of the stoop. She wasn't shivering. She wore no coat, just a linen dress, pale blue, and a scarf wrapped too loose around her throat. Her feet left no imprint in the snow. Julian knew. He opened the door without speaking. She stepped inside, and suddenly, the cold wasn't cold anymore. It was presence, memory. Music too delicate for ears, but too real to ignore. "I remember you," he said softly. She tilted her head. "You were only a whisper back then," he continued. "But now, you're listening better," she replied. The frost spirit, new and yet the same, glided past the workbench without touching it. Her fingers hovered over tools, over coils, over wood marked by decades of Alden's care. She paused at the rose. It was closed again, waiting. Julian stood beside her. "He made it for you." "No," she said. "He made it for time." She turned to face him then, her eyes full of everything winter knows. Stillness, sorrow, rest, grace. "And now you carry it." Julian swallowed. "I don't know what I'm doing." Neither did he, a hint of a smile. That's why it worked. She reached out, not to touch him, but to brush her fingers over the garden's tulip. It opened slowly, its petals catching the glow of moonlight filtered through frost. In the mercury pool, ripples spread, showing flashes of moments. Alden's hands, a child's laughter, Julian's first repair. Then, new ones. Ones that hadn't happened yet. A broken heart being handed a timepiece. A girl finding her voice while adjusting a pendulum. A boy in tears, holding a watch that ticked only when he whispered, "I miss you." Julian gasped. "These are yours," she said. "To keep, to give, to hold." She stepped back into the garden. The willow branches bowed gently, like old friends recognizing a returned traveler. The frost spirit turned one last time, and though her voice was nearly wind now, it reached him clearly. "You are not the keeper of clocks," she said. "You are the keeper of stillness." And then she was gone, not vanished, just elsewhere. Every clock in the room ticked once, not together, not in time, but in harmony. The shop became something different after that night. Not louder, never louder, but wider somehow, deeper. The walls still held clocks, still ticked with their soft, heart-like murmurs. But the space between the ticks, that was where the real magic lived now. In the silences people brought in, the ones they didn't yet know they carried. Julian learned to recognize them. The man who pretended his watch was for a business meeting, but clutched it like a lifeline. The teenager who claimed she was just curious, but lingered long after her watch had been fixed. The woman who couldn't speak at all, only handed him a cracked hourglass and sat quietly until her shoulders began to shake. And with each visitor, Julian listened, not just with ears, but with stillness. He never asked what time they wanted restored. He only asked, "What would you like to remember?" Sometimes they didn't answer aloud. Sometimes they just wept. Sometimes they smiled and said things like her voice, or the light in the kitchen before dinner, or that one laugh I haven't heard in years. And always, always, the garden responded. Not in grand gestures, not in miracles, but in whispers. A single petal would curl. The mercury pool would reflect a face lost to time. The quartz rose would emit a faint warmth, that clung to the fingertips like a familiar goodbye. Julian wrote nothing down. There was no ledger, no price tags. People left with repaired clocks, or not. Some left with nothing in their hands, but none of them left empty. He began to understand what Alden had built, not as a craftsman, but as a witness. This place had never been about measuring hours. It was about making space for them, holding them, honoring them. And one night, long after the last chime, Julian sat alone in the shop, hands folded in his lap, the velvet curtain closed, the fire low. He thought of Alden, of the frost spirit, of the way her voice had sounded, resonant and weightless, like the ring of silver across a frozen lake. And he wondered, when it is my time to stop, will she come for me too? The garden stirred. Not visibly, not audibly, but in the air, a stillness that felt like yes. Winter bled into spring once more. And though the snows outside melted and crocuses pushed shyly through the cobblestones, the shop remained touched by frost. A gentle frost, not the kind that bites, but the kind that whispers, "You are not forgotten." Julian grew older. Not suddenly, not all at once, but the changes came. His hands stiffened on colder mornings. His eyesight, once hawk-sharp, now softened at the edges. He began to hum to himself while he worked, low and tuneless, the way Alden once had. He didn't realize he picked it up, until one day, mid-repair, he caught himself finishing a lullaby he didn't remember learning. The clocks knew. They slowed for him now, not out of sympathy, but solidarity. They ticked a little longer between talks. One afternoon, he stood before the sealed dome of the garden, watching it. The rose had not moved in weeks. The willow had stilled again. The mercury pool was clear, but no longer reflected anything but the present. He placed his hand against the glass, not to open it, just to feel. Nothing happened, and that was okay. He sat beside it, on the same bench Alden once used, and leaned back. The silence settled over him like a warm coat. The room pulsed with the soft ache of memory. Then a sound. So faint it might have been the floor creaking, but no, it was coming from the pool. Julian leaned forward. The mercury rippled, and there she was. The frost stared, but not standing in the garden. She was seated on a bench, his bench, beside someone, a child. The child leaned on her shoulder, holding a small, broken gear in one hand. Julian stared, breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just a vision. It was a promise. He would not be the last. There would be others. Someone would come. Someone would sit here one day and listen, not to time, but to the silence in between. And they would carry it forward, not perfectly, not forever, but faithfully. He smiled. The next morning, a letter appeared on the inside of the shop door. No one had seen anyone place it there. It simply read, "When the time comes, the garden will open for you. Keep nothing, carry everything. J." The door remained unlocked from that day forward. The curtain, untouched, but behind it, the frost waited, as it always had, as it always would. The shop grew dusty again, not from neglect, but from rest. The way an old book gathers time on its cover, the way quiet settles in a home where no one rushes. The clock still ticked, but many had fallen silent, as if taking long, thoughtful pauses between memories. Years passed. People still came. Some just to see it, some to leave something behind. A locket, a ribbon, a broken watch, no longer telling hours, but still heavy with meaning. No one ever disturbed the garden. The velvet curtain, now worn soft as breath, stayed mostly closed. But those who wandered near it claimed to feel something. Not cold, not warmth, but a kind of stillness that wrapped around them like a blanket stitched from forgotten lullabies. And then, one day, she arrived. A girl, young, quiet, observant, not a child, not quite grown. She stepped inside the shop with her hands buried deep in the pockets of an oversized coat. Her eyes scanned the walls, but didn't linger on the clocks. They settled on the back of the room, on the curtain. She said nothing, walked forward, and stopped just short of the velvet. The silence wrapped around her. the kind of silence that listens, that waits. Then, without invitation, without resistance, the curtain drifted open. No wind, no cand, just understanding. The dome had returned. Inside, the garden looked different. Not untouched, not untouched, but evolved. The tulip's petals had new edges, tinged in silver. The willow had grown another branch, thinner, trembling, and the rose, it was in mid-bloom, as if it had been slowly unfolding, waiting for someone exactly like her. She stepped close. Kneeling beside it, she reached into her coat and pulled out a watch. Old, broken, the hand stuck at 5:47. She held it in both palms. "I don't want to fix it," she whispered. "I just want to remember why it mattered." The mercury pool stirred. Not violently, not loud, just enough to ripple the surface. And reflected there, a boy, Julian, sitting where she now sat, eyes closed, watching his hand, smiling. She didn't cry. She simply nodded, placed the watch beside the pool, and whispered, "Thank you." Then she stood. The rose turned one more petal, and the frost, unseen but present, settled around her ankles, like the hem of a patient season. Waiting, welcoming, ready to teach again. She didn't leave the shop that night. Instead, she wandered, barefoot, quiet, between the walls of ticking echoes. She trailed her fingers along dusty mantles, cracked glass faces, and brass hands, forever pointing toward memories. She read tiny inscriptions no one had seen in decades. "To my beloved, for the hour we met, until we meet again." Each word felt like a whisper brushing her shoulder. And then she found it, the bench. Not the one in the garden, no. This was Julian's bench, the one beside the back window, half sunken under a heap of soft cloths and faded blueprints, hidden behind a leaning cabinet of forgotten pendulums. She cleared it off gently, sat, exhaled. It felt right, like sitting in someone else's unfinished sentence. Her name was Elsie, 17, quiet by nature, quieter by grief. She had found the shop without meaning to, following a string of coincidences. A missed train, a wrong turn, an old man selling apples who told her, "If you're looking for something you can't name, try the shop with the clocks. Just don't expect it to tell time." And now she was here. The weight in her coat pocket was more than just the broken 5:47 watch. It was her grandfather's, Julian's, though no one in the family had believed his stories about the frost, the garden, the spirit who once refused to melt. But Elsie did, because she saw her. Not just once, but for years on the edge of sleep, in the corners of her childhood window, drawing frost flowers that vanished with morning. She had always known. And now, sitting in the shop, with dust motes dancing like slow stars, she felt it. The garden wasn't just remembering Julian. It was welcoming her. A breath moved through the air. No wind, no chill. But her spine straightened. The mercury pool shimmered behind the glass dome, reflecting her now, not as she was, but as she could become. Not telling her the future, but showing her how memory made room for healing. She approached the dome again. This time, she didn't bring the watch. She put a question. Can time ever forgive? The cool didn't ripple. The rose didn't bloom. But behind her, one of the clocks began to chime. Not a sharp, ticking bell, a melody. Low, tender, sad, but forgiving. Elsie turned slowly. The frost was beginning to return, not on the windows, not on the floor, inside her. She felt it curling into her ribs, not with cold, but with clarity. And as the chime faded, she whispered to the quiet, "I'm staying." The garden didn't answer. It simply accepted. And that was all she needed. The days that followed were wrapped in slow wonder. Elsie slept on the bench her grandfather once used, curled beneath a blanket of ticking shadows. She swept the shop each morning, not because it was messy, but because she liked the rhythm of the broom over the old wooden planks. She didn't unlock the front door. Not yet. She wasn't ready for visitors. Instead, she explored. Not just the physical space, though she found treasures in every drawer. blueprints scribbled in Alden's precise hand, gear sets organized like poems, a copper key wrapped in a faded note that simply read, "This one's only for letting go." But more than that, she explored the stillness. She learned how to listen to it, to breathe alongside it, to sense when the garden stirred, even if it never moved. The velvet curtain remained open now. She didn't need to hide it. Some nights she'd sit beside the glass dome and talk, not aloud, but inside her. And she swore she felt it listen. One evening she asked the pool, "What do you remember of my grandfather?" The mercury shimmered, and slowly, like mist over a mirror, an image formed. Julian, much younger, was sitting on a floor, hands covered in oil, laughing with a small boy who held a toy made from broken watch parts. The boy smiled wide. A warmth spread across the pool that made Elsie's chest ache. She didn't recognize the child, but she didn't need to. The garden was showing her what mattered. Joy passed on. One night, as the snow tacked gently on the glass above, she woke with a thought burning in her mind, a new piece. She rushed to the workbench, heart racing. Her hands, clumsy at first, found tools long asleep. She didn't sketch, didn't measure. She just made a small pendant, clock-shaped, but with no hands. Only a single gear in the center, turning not with power, but with presence. She set a crystal in its middle, clear as frost, light as breath. When she placed it beside the garden's dome, the quartz rose gave the faintest tremble. It was her first gift, not to time, not to the shop, but to the silence itself. The next morning, for the first time, the tulip bloomed without being touched. She smiled and whispered, "I think I'm ready now." She walked to the front of the shop, flipped the sign on the door, and for the first time in years, it read, "Open," for those who have forgotten how to remember. They began to come again. Not in droves, not in crowds, just one at a time. Always one at a time. A boy with shaking hands and his mother's broken ring watch. A woman who had worn grief around her wrist for so long she forgot how to hold anything else. A man who spoke to no one but laughed behind a compass, stuck spinning, searching for something he couldn't name. Elsie welcomed them, not with answers, but with listening. And the shop listened too. Clocks chimed gently when needed. The bench creaked in ways that sounded like encouragement. Even the dust on the windows settled differently, as if the very air respected the stories whispered inside. And the garden bloomed. Slowly, petal by petal. The quartz rose no longer turned only when remembered. It began to pulse softly when love entered the room. The mercury pool would ripple, not just with memory, but with possibility. The willow's branches bowed lower, their glass leaves trembling like lullabies. Elsie never tried to replace Alden or Julian. She didn't need to. She became what the garden needed. Not a clockmaker, but a keeper. Of stories, of silences, of the space between. And one quiet morning, as golden light spilled through the front windows, warming every dial and hinge in the shop, she felt it. A presence, not cold, not even frost, just breath. A shimmer gathered at the edges of the garden. The tulip lifted, the rose glowed, the willow held its breath, and she saw them, Alden, Julian, and her, not standing in the garden, but part of it. Not ghosts, not spirits, but memory made whole. She felt no fear, only belonging. A final chime rang through the room, clear, perfect, complete, and then everything was still. For a long moment, time forgot how to tick. And in that stillness, the shop became what it always truly was. A place not to measure time, but to make peace with it. The end. But memory never ends.